The late-night television host Johnny Carson was a fixture for many years. Through his charisma, humor, and impeccable timing, he brought laughter to America's faces night after night. However, there were times when things weren't always rose to the surface. Occasionally, even his producers were taken aback. Flawed interviews, feuds behind the scenes, jokes that crossed the line, and episodes that were subtly buried. The producers of The Tonight Show hoped we would forget these 14 shocking and awkward moments. My life and career as a young Johnny. Corning, Iowa was the site of John William Carson's birth on October 23, 1925. As the night progressed, he became the undisputed master. His dad, Homer Lloyd Kit Carson, was a power company manager, and his mom, Ruth Elizabeth Carson, was a stay-at-home mom. The family moved around a lot before finally settling in Norfolk, Nebraska, when Johnny was 8 years old, a town that would shape his formative years. After coming across a magic book when he was 12 years old, Carson became captivated by performances. He quickly began performing magic tricks under the guise of the Great Carson after purchasing a magician's kit. As a 14-year-old, he made his professional performing debut at the Norfolk Rotary Club. Church socials and his mom's bridge club were his next stops for amusement. Carson joined the United States Army during WYAC. He attended Millsaps College and Columbia University as a midshipman in the V-12 program. Although he did not participate in actual combat, he honed his talent for captivating audiences while entertaining troops aboard the USS Pennsylvania with a ventriloquist dummy named Eddie. Carson returned to Norfolk State University and continued her education at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln after the war. In 1949, Carson earned a degree with a concentration in speech and drama and a radio minor. Written as a combination of analysis and taped skits, his senior thesis demonstrated his initial understanding of comedic structure. Starting with WOW Radio in Omaha, where he hosted a morning show with comedic banter, Carson got his start in the broadcasting industry. Carson began reading the station IDs and weather reports for KNXT in Los Angeles after relocating there in 1951. Despite its discreet nature, it yielded the opportunity for him to host Carson's Cellar, a show that featured sketches and characters that would later be featured on The Tonight Show. After impressing network executives as Red Skelton's replacement, Johnny Carson got his own brief variety show, The Johnny Carson Show, which was his early major break. Who Do You Trust? In a game show became his subsequent hosting gig. Who, to everyone's surprise, became a national celebrity thanks to his charm and wit. After Jack Pierre stepped down as host in 1962, Carson continued the role for 30 years. Carson revolutionized late-night television with his rapid-fire banter, impeccable timing, and talent for eliciting stellar performances from his guests. Karnak the Magnificent and Aunt Blabby were just two of Carson's iconic characters, and millions of people watched his monologues every night. Carson exuded an air of absolute authority. In addition to being inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame in 1987, Carson received 6 Emmy Awards and a Peabody Award. In 1932, Carson was honored by the Kennedy Center, and in 1992, he was presented with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. After Carson retired in 1992, he continued to be highly esteemed. In fact, David Letterman and Conan O'Brien, his successors, cited Carson as the standard by which they were judged. Johnny Carson's legacy impacted American television and comedy for generations after his death on January 23, 2005, at the age of 79. David Letterman and Conan O'Brien, Carson's successors, both cited him as the standard by which they measured themselves, demonstrating the continued esteem in which he was held even after his retirement in 1992. Johnny Carson's legacy impacted American television and comedy for generations after his death on January 23, 2005. At the age of 79, the private life of Johnny. Carson's charisma captivated millions of viewers, but behind the scenes, his life was much more complicated. During his career, Carson was married 4 times. He rose to fame, reigned for a while, and then fell from grace with each of his marriages. He wed Joan Jody Merrill Walcott for the first time after meeting her at Nebraska. Christopher, Corey, and Richard were their offspring from their 1949 marriage. However, the outcome was brutal and quick. Their marriage fell apart as Carson's fame started to grow. Their marriage was marked by a rowdy argument and icy silences. They reportedly filed for a divorce in 1963, the same year that Carson began his illustrious tenure as host of The Tonight Show, according to biographers. In 1991, their son Richard was killed in a car accident. Carson reportedly suffered greatly as a result of a tragedy about which he said very little. Joanne Copeland, his second wife, had a career in modeling and television hosting. In 1963, they tied the knot, and she was instrumental in motivating him to step up his game as host of The Tonight Show. However, the intensity of the spotlight was intolerable. After Joanne's subsequent portrayal of Carson as emotionally distant, which was shared by others around him, the marriage ended in 1972. Carson wed fellow model Joanna Holland later that year. Their marriage was in disarray when The Tonight Show relocated to California, even though they resided in New York with her son. Working long hours and striving for perfection left little time for his personal life. Joanna died in 2025, and they got a divorce in 1985. Alexis Moss was his fourth and last wife, and they wed in 1987. Theirs was a more subtle, discreet affair than his prior relationships. After Carson retired in 1992, he and Alexis settled into a peaceful life in Malibu, where he continued to sail, read, and enjoy retirement. Producer George Schlatter has said, "The real love of Johnny's life was Alex. Carson was infamously private despite his fame." Henry Bushkin, who was close to him as a lawyer and confidant, said that he could be funny, generous and gracious one minute, and cold, distant, and heartless the next. Carson once made the funny comment, "If I had given as much to marriage as I gave to The Tonight Show, I'd probably have a hell of a marriage." It was a line that showed his self-awareness and regret. The man behind the jokes was a lonely soul who poured his heart into his work, but kept his emotions hidden. There was genius, tension, and finally, a quiet quest for peace in his relationships. Even after tying the knot, Carson avoided close relationships. In private, he was emotionally distant and prone to frequent outbursts of anger, despite his charismatic demeanor in public. He was a man who, according to his friends, could be in the middle of a crowd and yet feel totally alone. Carson remained politically neutral while appearing on television, but his opinions were unfiltered and incisive when he was behind the camera. When challenged about his jokes at home, he once told his detractors that they were likely saying something much worse, a clue that he perceived concealed beneath the public's portrayal of virtue. Beyond his acting career, Johnny Carson was a paradox in and of himself. He made everyone laugh, but he remained quiet and reserved. The desk-bound genius was a real puzzle. This further contributed to the unforgettable nature of his story. 14 moments that shocked society. Even though Johnny Carson reigned supreme over late-night television, producers had a hard time keeping those moments under wraps, even on his show. They were intentional, they were unfiltered and extremely unsettling. This list contains 14 instances that were so shocking in the studio that the general audience almost missed them. It all started with the band episode. Some episodes of The Tonight Show have become legendary in late-night television because they were so obscure. This enigmatic program reportedly aired once before disappearing, according to StarCrate. There will be no official listing, transcripts, reruns, or salvaged footage. The fact that NBC never acknowledged its existence has fueled generations of conjecture among media historians. What happened was the subject of rumors. There have been rumors that the show was canceled due to a guest appearance gone wrong, a celebrity's tantrum, or a racist outburst. According to other sources, Carson was left visibly shaken and unable to recover after a collapse that occurred behind the scenes spilled over into the live program. Carson, who is normally composed, was reportedly so distraught that NBC executives rushed to scrap the entire program, worried about the network's image being damaged. The terrifying part about this moment is how completely silent it was afterwards. Unlike other shows that subtly removed or buried controversial or humiliating moments, this one was completely forgotten. A forgotten analytic footnote in television history. All the attempts at covering it up just made it more enigmatic. For years, fans have wanted to know what happened that night, but no one with inside knowledge has ever come clean. What NBC did to try to hide the lost Johnny Carson episode This clip explores this eerie mystery, piecing together theories and archival evidence that point to a moment so unstable that not even Carson's renowned composure could save it from crumbling. The controversy, the plot, or something more intimate. It was one of the most mysterious and unsettling episodes in late-night television history, and no one knows what happened. Secondly, the aftermath of Joan Rivers. The late-night comedy team of Joan Rivers and Johnny Carson was more than just a work partnership. In 1965, Carson famously told Rivers, "You are going to be a star." Rivers became a frequent guest and later Carson's permanent guest host, taking over for him whenever he was away, after he had championed her early in her career. But that all changed in 1986. Without informing Carson until the deal was nearly finalized, Rivers accepted a groundbreaking offer from the fledgling Fox network to host her own late-night show, making history as the first woman to do so. According to Rivers' subsequent statements, she was afraid the deal would fall through and didn't want to risk losing her spot on The Tonight Show too soon. But she phoned Carson to discuss the situation, and he abruptly hung up on her before she could even get a chance to tell him. Their conversation ended there. Carson severed all ties with her and permanently removed her from The Tonight Show. He still refused to engage in conversation with her whenever they crossed paths in public. His venomous criticism shocked the producers, and their feud became famous as one of the most notorious silent splits in television history. Nearly half a century after her debut and far after Carson's passing, Rivers did not make another appearance on The Tonight Show until 2014. Lastly, the battle involving Wayne Newton. The animosity between Johnny Carson and Wayne Newton extended beyond a simple power struggle. Fighting almost broke out into physical altercations. Carson started making fun of Newton's masculinity every night in the 1970s, when Newton came out as gay or effeminate. Newton tried to laugh it off at first, but the jests kept coming. They were recited nightly until other comics started using them. Newton proceeded to storm into the Burbank offices of NBC, where he discovered Carson in a meeting with producer Fred Dordova, and requested a moment of solitude after attempting to privately contact Carson for 15 months. The events that followed went down in late-night lore. Newton threatened Carson, saying, "Cut out all these jokes on me and they'll cut right out or I'll kick your ass." Carson kept his famously cold demeanor and never had Newton back on his show. Newton subsequently tarnished Carson's reputation by accusing him of being a nasty person and claiming that the jokes were intentional cruelness. In fact, he went so far as to say that Carson's influence was to blame for the vicious rumors regarding mob ties that prompted a false lawsuit against NBC. Their relationship never recovered. From the severe criticism that led to the unexplained disappearance of Newton's Tonight Show appearances. Number 4, the on-air challenge from Charles Grodin. Charles Grodin, an actor and Satanist, made an appearance on The Tonight Show on September 5, 1990, and gave the most embarrassing interview in late-night television history. Grodin's deadpan, dry wit blurred the line between antagonism and comedy in talk show appearances, making them more like performance art. This time, though, he went too far. In the middle of the segment, Grodin posed a question to Carson. "Are your guests even important to you?" There was no hint of sarcasm or leer in the question. They posed the question as an obstacle. The studio fell silent as Carson, visibly startled, responded with a chilly staccato. A buzzing sound could be felt. Grodin was unfazed. He persisted in chipping away at Carson's glitzy exterior and the show's monotonous pace. A genuine ego clash developed out of something that began as an odd little thing. Spectators were at a loss for words, both in laughter and in their breathing. Carson, who was famous for his ability to make people feel bad about themselves, appeared distressed. The segment was allowed to air in its entirety by Carson, despite producers' concerns that it would damage The Tonight Show's carefully constructed veneer, as reported by Splice Today. The clip continues to be viewed by fans as a peculiar incident involving the king of late night being taken unawares on his own ground, not because of controversy, but because of an unexpected guest who dared to question the show's very legitimacy. Part performance, part reality, and 100% unsettling. Number 5, Oliver Reed vs. Shelley Winters. On Johnny Carson's Tonight Show, Shelley Winters made history as a late-night celebrity. Oliver Reed, a British actor, started making sexually suggestive and sexist comments in 1975, specifically about women's roles and appearance. Famously forthright and intolerant of sexism, Winters did not think twice. She stood up around the midway point of the skit, picked up her drink and threw it at Reed. Their jaws dropped. As the tension inside the studio reached dizzying heights, Carson, who is usually the voice of reason, appeared visibly disturbed. Because of how intense the moment was, the producers decided to remove the most controversial parts of the segment from future airings of the show in an effort to preserve its stellar reputation. However, the initial broadcast was unaltered, and online footage of the event has turned it into a legendary broadcast of live television beat-em. The defiance that Winter displayed on air was not an emotional response. Something had to give. Animal Chaos number 6. It was never guaranteed that Joan Embassy would make an animal appearance every week. However, they descended into complete anarchy during a single night of 1970s Tonight Show filming. The monkey that Embry brought in had an unexpected grip on a guest's hand. Not so hard that it hurt, but enough to make everyone in the studio laugh nervously. She then showed a snake that slithered free of its handler and started slithering across the stage. Shortly after, Johnny Carson, who is known to be uncomfortable around strange animals, retreated and trembled, clearly distressed. The crew hurried to control the audience's gasps. Carson made an effort to relax, but his unease was plain to see. In later reruns, the segment was cut, with the most chaotic seconds removed, so the producers could keep the show's shine. Animal mayhem truly triumphed over the set on this show, giving the audience a glimpse of Carson's genuine terror, a change from the usual informal and playful Joan Embassy visits. Joke number 7, the Zsa Zsa Gabor cat. The Tonight Show has one of the best ever stories, but it was most likely never true. Legend has it that Zsa Zsa Gabor once asked Johnny Carson, "Would you like to pet my pussy?" on The Tonight Show while holding a cat. Carson allegedly said, "Sure, just move the damn cat." The joke has been repeated ad nauseum in late-night comedy, internet forums, and pop culture. On the other hand, consider this. There is no verified footage, no written account, and no official announcement that this conversation ever occurred. Nowadays, the majority of scholars and fans think it's just an urban legend, or perhaps an instance of the Mandela effect, in which people have a vivid memory of something that actually didn't happen. Raquel Welch and Jane Fonda even get their moments in certain adaptations of the event. The legend was probably made possible by Carson's image as a mischievous double entendre comic. However, the instant was never aired after the debates and interviews were archived. Memories, not tape, hold the key to this joke's longevity. Counting 8. Forget about Carson's monologue. Carson arrived at The Tonight Show on December 14, 1988, prepared to give his customary monologue. However, an issue arose first. He was caught off guard when a beeper in the crowd went off. Time was then adjusted by producer Freddie DeCordova, who had stepped in from offstage. Carson was thrown entirely out of whack by the 2 interruptions. Once again, he attempted to begin his joke, but he was completely blank. Carson couldn't control his laughter, and instead burst out laughing. He struggled to form words, attempted again, and finally gave up, laughing so hard he could hardly speak. Everyone in the crowd started laughing uncontrollably. Even Ed McMahon found himself unable to suppress his amusement. It wasn't the error that made it noteworthy. It was how Carson felt about it. Instead of trying to ignore or downplay the gaffe, he gave it his full attention. He embraced the situation and used it as a running joke throughout the remainder of the show. A side of him was revealed by his genuine reaction. Warm, casual, and incredibly human were qualities that his admirers adored. For fear of making it appear too raw, producers allegedly considered removing the segment from future reruns. But Carson was not going to cut it. Today, the video has gone viral, proving that even the most seasoned performers have off nights. And sometimes those nights can be the worst. There are 9. Don Rickles gives Carson the boot. Don Rickles' cutting insult humor rendered Carson speechless, and he didn't even appear on The Tonight Show very often. Rickles famously went on a rapid-fire roast of Carson in one of their most famous exchanges, making fun of his money and reserved personality. As Rickles ripped through the set like a demolition ball of humor, Carson, who usually takes charge, could only sit back and laugh. Not only did the audience enjoy it, but Carson, who was the intended target, also found it entertaining. They had a bombastic chemistry. Carson attempted to maintain a straight face as Rickles taunted him about his marriages, clothes, and even his sidekick, Ed McMahon. When Carson found out that Rickles had shattered his cigarette box the previous night while performing as a guest on Bob Newhart's show, it led to a legendary exchange. During the live broadcast, Carson unexpectedly jumped onto the set next to it. With mic in hand, he personally scolded Rickles, making the roast a two-way street. It was unforgettable, wild, and live. 10 Twister segment featuring Zsa Zsa Gabor. Producers at NBC were nervous after Johnny Carson made a strange new board game popular. Across the country in 1966, the new game Twister was sitting on store shelves when Carson had actress Zsa Zsa Gabor play it on The Tonight Show Live. One of the most sexually suggestive exchanges in the history of The Tonight Show began as harmless small talk, but soon became something much more. Carson spun the fortune wheel. He quickly rolled into a crawling position across her as Gabor arched into position. The crowd erupted in gasps and laughter as her already low-cut dress plummeted even lower. It appeared like the NBC producers had no idea how fascinating the moment would turn out to be. The segment ran in its entirety the first time around, but later reruns were edited to remove any physical contact and silence any complaints. Still, harm had been done. The next day, Twister sales skyrocketed, and everyone was talking about Carson's steamy chemistry with Gabor. It nearly shocked late-night television and saved Twister. 11. The Wedding of Little Tim. From late-night comedy to television spectacle, The Tonight Show transitioned on December 17, 1969. It was so enormous that it was just as popular with viewers as the moon landing. Miss Vicky Binger, a 17-year-old contestant, was married to novelty singer Tiny Tim that night. Tim was famous for his ukulele ballads and falsetto. As the newlyweds celebrated their union in front of an aghast studio audience, the set featured 10,000 tulips that had been imported from Holland, a 6-minute ceremony, and Carson playing it straight-faced. With 45 million viewers, it was the second highest viewing figure for an episode of The Tonight Show at the time, behind only Carson's Farewell, which was broadcast years later. To put it in context, more than twice as many Americans watched Prince William and Kate Middleton's wedding. However, producers at NBC were anxious. Some were concerned that the segment's TP-like staging, Tiny Tim's eccentric personality, and the segment's surreal quality would compromise the show's credibility. Carson, ever the professional, showed no emotion, but behind his back, employees whispered that they'd crossed a boundary. Their daughter Tulip was born 8 years after the couple's divorce. Looking back on the experience, Miss Vicky said, "I was just a kid thinking, this will be fun." And it was. 12. Peter Popoff scandal. In 1986, The Tonight Show took an unusual departure from comedy to investigative expose. Johnny Carson himself, having been a magician, invited skeptic James the Amazing Randi to expose televangelist Peter Popoff, who claimed to get messages from God during his faith-healing crusades. Popoff would call out names, ailments, and personal details about members of the audience, claiming it was God speaking through him. But Randi had found the secret. Popoff was employing an earpiece hidden within his clothing, receiving real-time information from his wife backstage, who had obtained it from prayer cards filled out by attendees. On the air, Randi replayed tapes of Popoff's wife spooning him lines like, "She's got cancer of the uterus," and Popoffing back the same words verbatim moments later. The studio fell silent. Carson, visibly shaken, let the evidence speak for itself. The bit didn't just embarrass Popoff. It sent shockwaves through the televangelist community. NBC producers seemed to worry about outraged reaction from religious viewers, but Carson stood firm. It was one of the most powerful truth bombs ever detonated on late-night TV. 13. Raquel Welch walks off mid-inner. In one of the most cringe and dramatic Tonight Show moments ever, actress Raquel Welch stormed off the stage in the middle of an interview after an angry exchange with Johnny Carson. Welch, the embodiment of glamour and a hard-nosed personality to boot, was on to publicize a venture when Carson subjected her to a series of sarcastic remarks that she took as condescending and belittling. The tension mounted quickly, and Welch, seemingly fed up beyond words, stood up and walked out on stage before the bit was over. The audience was stunned. Carson, usually the master of comebacks, was shaken visibly. NBC producers seemed troubled by what had happened and refused to run the segment again, for fear that it would hurt the reputation of Carson and the public image of Welch. It became one of those rare Tonight Show moments that appeared only once and was then quietly buried. This was not a celeb meltdown, but an instant that served to show Carson's charm to be restricted and leave television to be unscripted. Welch's walk-off is the most dramatic exit in late-night TV history, and NBC's attempt to censor it only added to its mystique. 14. Carson's veto power. Behind the late-night spontaneity, he protected his image jealously. Carson had the ability to veto repeats of certain programs, especially those featuring awkward interviews, bombed jokes, or personally humiliating moments, according to a veteran NBC videotape engineer. Producers indulged his judgment, even when it meant shelving entire broadcasts. But the real mystery runs deeper. In the early 1970s, hundreds of Tonight Show tapes from the 1960s were moved to Burbank and stored on temporary shelves. When a building manager tried to reclaim the space, he discreetly ordered that the tapes be taken to a dump and burned. Carson was furious when he learned of this, especially after he requested a 1968 clip that was now lost. He reportedly said, "If I had only known it was a matter of storage space, I would have gladly paid the $1,000 a month for a warehouse down the street." Carson maintained tight control over the reruns despite the fact that NBC owned the tapes and not him. It is unclear whether the full list of rerun episodes he rejected is still in NBC's vault or has vanished forever. Our current understanding of Carson's legacy is a sanitized, iconic, and painstakingly edited version of his wishes for his legacy to live on. Much obliged for your time. To ensure you don't miss any future videos like this one, don't forget to hit like and subscribe and press the bell icon. Thanks for watching.